You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Good morning, Allison. How are you doing these days?
Hi, Justin. Good to see you. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time.
And that part of that is because we went on an epic vacation. We took a trip, our family, to a riverboat cruise to your neck of the woods, to Oregon and Washington, and it was amazing. It was amazing. My parents took my brother and his wife and Sean and I, and it was fantastic. So,
oh, that's great.
And it's always good to get through a trip without incident.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's part of why it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then just in the last couple of days, I've had two different family members that do not live in my house, but who ended up in the ER. And I think that just sits different when you're a caregiver and you get it and you know it. And one of them was in Sean's ER, I like to call it, because essentially we've almost paid for a wing there with all of our medical bills. But it just sits differently when you know what it feels like to be sitting there and you have lived it. And so even though, one of the people I went and visited and all of that, but even though I wasn't the primary caregiver in either of those, it just felt like a lot, I think, in some ways more so than if I was just a person who had never experienced being in the ER. So one is out of the hospital. The other one's almost out of the hospital. So hopefully we're on the other side of that. I just told the family that we have met our ER quota for the year. And everyone needs to listen to that and not get injured or sick anymore. So we'll see if they listen to me. Yeah. But how about you? How's it going over there?
Things are going all right. We felt like July was really busy. And August, thankfully, we've had a little less going on. And so it's been kind of nice to have things be a little quieter.
Yeah.
Just kind of be at home, enjoy that. So that's been good. It's it's been nice.
Good.
Yeah.
I keep thinking because it was just over a year ago that we were there and I met you and Sarah in person. And that was awesome.
That was awesome. Amazing.
We need to do that. It's your turn now. You got to come to Minnesota.
Yeah, you're right. I got to come to Minnesota. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, for today, I was thinking, because I had this conversation with a friend of mine the other day, someone I've known forever. And I said, I have these support groups, because she was talking about something that's going on in her life. And I said, no pressure or anything, but I offer these caregiver support groups and you're welcome to come. And she said, well, I just feel like, I don't feel like I qualify as a caregiver. I don't know if I count because the person I'm caring for doesn't live in my house. They have mental health issues, not physical health issues. And I feel like it's not like what you and Sean do.
Right.
And I was like, oh, girl. Yes, you're a caregiver, 100%. And it just made me think about all these comparisons that we do, right?
Right. Yeah.
And in lots of different ways as humans, but also as caregivers. And so I thought that was something that we could talk about today.
Yeah.
Because I hear that a lot, that people are like, well, we don't have what's going on with you do. And friends, we do not have to reach the Allison and Sean standard to get this title. I hope that nobody has to reach that level. Right. And so it's like, why do we feel like we have to justify or qualify, you know what I mean? Or get to a certain level before we're able to have this title or something. Do you know what I mean? And
I do.
And I feel like you've even said a lot lately, well, Sarah's doing really well.
Right. Yeah.
So am I a caregiver? I don't know. What are your thoughts about this whole comparison thing?
Yeah. I think it is part of human nature to observe differences and see comparisons. And I think that that's just a thing that will always exist.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of your response to that difference that kind of depicts how that's going to make you feel, But yeah, you had mentioned me personally, as of late, it certainly does not feel like I am as much of a caregiver, and it's because Sarah's doing really well. And so I have much less responsibility in that regard.
Yeah.
And so, am I still a caregiver? Yeah, but it's different. And I think it's different for me, having gone through some pretty intense caregiving.
Yeah.
that it's okay. I have been a caregiver, and like I can identify as that through that experience. Whereas if someone is coming into it and they see whether it's, you and Sean or, someone else in a really intense situation, and it's like you are, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like you have that level of responsibility, or your person is not sick to that extent, or in a different way, or is not just in day in and day out, just so not doing well, that it would make you think like, yeah, okay, that's what a caregiver is. Like that's feels so far from where I am.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a detriment to like we've said, claiming the title of caregiver, like acknowledging that that's your role, like that opens the door for you to find support, for you to like process this stuff that's going on in your life.
Yeah.
And so I think that making that comparison and feeling like you have to reach a certain level, like that's just not true. There's, are you doing things to help another person get through their life? I guess. I don't know what there's not a high bar.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a caregiver that I have been talking to who recently just really sort of came into herself and kind of realized like, oh, wow, I am a caregiver, and has been for a long time, but hadn't claimed it. And is really sort of like feeling like I'm sort of empowered and sort of like, oh, I can think about myself differently and talk about myself differently. And it's almost like a healing, right? And that like, if you don't even recognize or name that part of yourself, you can't even, I don't know, acknowledge it to yourself.
Right.
That like, wow, yeah, I am tired because of this thing, or yeah, I am doing this thing. And and I just wonder like, why don't we want to do that? Like, why is it that people might not want to claim that, or might say, well, I'm not this much, right? Like, why do we feel like it has to be so high, so hard? You know what I mean? In order to say that this thing is happening to us. And I think this actually is both, like I've seen people with like different cancers or different diseases as well, who are like, well, I'm sick, but I'm not sick like Sean.
Yeah. Right.
And again, it's like, oh, friend, just, it's okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think that is? What's at the root of that?
I wonder if part of it is we don't want to be perceived as, I don't know how to say this exactly. Like if we say that we're a caregiver, like we're somehow overselling our situation,
right?
Or like drawing more attention to ourselves. And then we feel like maybe we should be allowed to.
Yeah.
That maybe if you are, if you're comparing yourself to someone in a much more intense caregiving situation, that like some imposter syndrome kind of stuff going on. And it's just like, we don't want other people to think that we are, I don't know, and this is certainly not true, but like overreacting to the situation.
Right. I do. Yeah.
Something in that vein.
Right. I almost like keep thinking about the word like whining, right? Like if they think that like, do we feel like we're just like whining and complaining? If like, I can't say that I'm a caregiver because look at what Allison's doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas like, I wouldn't see that as whining at all.
Right.
But I get that people might think that like, oh, well, you can't. Like, it's just so different. Because I think other things I hear people say is like, okay, if the person's dealing with mental health issues or addiction issues, they might say, well, does that really count? Yes, it counts.
Yeah,
and like, nobody's counting, essentially. Right? Or some people will say, well, they don't live with me, or they don't even live in the same state. But like, as I, encountered with my mother-in-law, like she was 10 hours away, but I still would consider myself like a remote caregiver because I was invested in that and doing things from afar. Or if someone is newly sick or someone's like in remission, like there are seasons of this.
Yeah, for sure.
That we all go through, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't count. Right. And so it's hard to think about, I think people are maybe trying to be sensitive. I mean, it's sort of, I think back to this old neighbor we had who one time, I'm sure I've told the story before, but I was saying, oh, Sean's got this new diagnosis and yada, yada. And She's like, well, sometimes my thyroid acts up.
Mm.
And I was like, what? Right. So, I mean, there's certainly that kind of thing where people sort of insensitively are like, I stubbed my toe today.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we can take that to the extreme and be like, oh, well, I can't even talk about my hard things because it doesn't compare at all to your hard things.
Right.
Well, we're always going to find someone who's got something harder.
Yeah.
Right. And so we want to acknowledge, and it's okay and healthy to acknowledge our own hard thing and our own things that we are doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. I wonder too, like in this, I don't know, age of social media, how that plays into this to some extent, because it is, I have met caregivers that way and like connected. You being one of them.
Yeah.
And that has been a really wonderful thing. Yeah. But it's also gives you exposure to people in all different levels of caregiving or intensities in ways that, maybe you wouldn't see as much before. And so there's much more opportunity for comparison in that sense that heightens that. And I think that can potentially also play into your mind like, oh, these people, I mean, he's living in the hospital and, that's not what I'm dealing with. And so again, like we're not keeping score. There's not like, it's right. But it's somehow that's just wired in us to care about that to that extent or something. I don't know.
Right. Which just feels like we're not giving ourselves enough credit.
Yeah.
I think is the bottom line. Like we're not giving ourselves enough credit for the hard things that we're doing. And like you've said so many times, like when we don't claim it and we don't acknowledge it, we don't talk about it, we don't get support. Right. And so by hiding it or minimizing what we're doing or we're going through, we might not get that support that we need and we deserve. Right.
Yeah. I think too, there's this comparison between us and the person we're caring for. And we see that, we're not facing this situation directly. Like we're not the one who's sick.
Yes.
And we don't want to take the spotlight from them.
Yes.
And I think that that's another piece of it. And that's another comparison. And that's, I don't know, part of that, I think for me was like thinking of us as a team or, we're partners going through this together. And so what impacts Sarah impacts me and what impacts me impacts Sarah. And sort of like, we have to do this as partners going through this.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's what I found a lot, especially when I started the negative space, was because people were like, I can't say this is hard because look at my person. My person's like hooked up to all these wires and this is sick and and what am I complaining about? Right. I don't get to say this is hard. I don't get to complain.
Right.
But again, then that's not healthy for us. And for anybody around us.
Yeah.
And I think then what might happen is then if we see, like if I see another caregiver who's just like, everything is great and this is a blessing and a gift, then there's that comparison of me being like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Like when I've led different support groups, and then if someone comes in and kind of bright sides everything and says, well, everything's great, you can just see other people be like, uh-oh, am I supposed to like, am I a jerk now because I just said that it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw this, but Bruce Willis's wife just posted this video that's going viral because, Bruce Willis has, I think, a form of dementia. And his wife just posted a video that was like, I just went hiking, but I want you all to know that me going hiking doesn't mean I'm doing well. Like I am not doing well. Like I'm forcing myself to go hiking because I have to do something that's going to be okay for myself. This is terrible. And I am not doing well. Right. And so I'm glad that that's getting a lot of attention, but I was reading the comments.
Yeah.
And there are people who are saying things like, we all have hard stuff. Why is she even talking about this? Right. Or just get a nurse to take care of him. And I thought like, okay, Bruce Willis's wife probably has enough money to get a nurse.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that watching your husband deteriorate in this way is easy. Right. And so it's because of stuff like that. Right. That makes people feel like, oh, I don't count. Oh, I can't say this thing out loud. Like if, because of the insensitive things that people maybe have said. Right.
Right.
And, yeah.
And even there, like, you can't do a seemingly, I don't know, a thing for yourself or a like benign thing like going for a hike without qualifying it. Like,
Right.
how much that we feel like we have to do that in these situations. Like, and I think about, yeah, Sarah's having a good day and we were able to go to this thing, but that doesn't mean she's better.
Right.
And having to like always kind of qualify because of how you feel like it's going to be perceived. And that's something that's kind of, I don't know if that's true for everybody in every caregiving situation, but I know that that's certainly something that we've kind of had to be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, I think that even like saying we just went on an 8-day riverboat cruise.
Yeah, right.
That people are like, wait, what? I thought you had this really hard life and that you couldn't go places and that he was really sick. Yep. True. Yep. And it is like by grace that we made it through and that we are on the other side, But it's like, I kind of feel even weird just saying that.
Yeah.
That we were able to do that. But also there were many, 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 many seasons in which that would not have been the case. And we could have not gone on that trip. And so it's like when we have the opportunity, we're going to do it. Right. But it's like, here I am justifying it. Yeah. Another thing that this friend of mine who said about like, well, I don't know if I count, that later she said I could share this. She said, I think another reason I don't feel like I can like go to a caregiver support group is because I feel like I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't feel like I'm a good caregiver. And therefore, I don't feel like I can even call myself one because I don't feel like I'm good at it.
Wow.
Yeah. I was like, ooh, girl, that's some truth that you're speaking. I mean, I'm not saying that she's speaking, you know what I mean? That was some deep reflection that she did to be able to share that it's like, I don't even deserve to have this title because I feel like I'm not doing it very well.
Right.
And I was like, whoo. So I just want to say, this goes back to our Enneagram conversation.
Okay.
Is that like, we all like, there's a million ways to look at this role. Right. And when we think about the Enneagram and we each have our own different superpowers, right? With that is that like, each of us is going to be good at it in a different way and it's going to look different for each of us. And I think to know that there is no one way that this looks per person, per day, per situation, per anything. And so it's not like, oh, look at Justin, he's so good at this and this and this as a caregiver and I'm not, therefore I don't even deserve to have this title, right? Like, no, we're all just doing the best we can.
Yeah.
And it's not like this rank that we need to like earn. It's a role that we have been thrust into and it's a role that we're playing, not like a title that we have earned or qualified for. Right.
Yeah. I think this reminds me of something. I don't remember where I heard it, but I think about it from time to time. Don't compare someone else's on stage to your backstage. So like, I think about like with social media, like people are sharing what's going on in their lives or like often those are highlights. Those are like,
absolutely,
the good moments. Most people aren't prone to share the things that are like when they're in the pits and it's just the worst and they're doing poorly and handling it. But we tend to then highlight and think to ourselves like us at our worst.
Right.
And so like we think of ourselves as caregivers and how we feel like we are not, I don't know, this doesn't feel like the right wording, but like rising to the situation to meet the challenge or something. And we feel like maybe you feel resentful and maybe you feel like you don't want to be doing this and that somehow you're failing in that regard because you're struggling with having to live this life. And then you see someone who seemingly all smiles is like, this is, we're facing this together. And I don't know, it seems like they've got it all figured out and know how to manage everything and are on top of everything. And it's just like, well, that's so far from me. Thinking that you're not a caregiver because you're not doing it well. That's, I hope that's, I don't know. I don't love that that's something that people feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you have? Like, what do you want to say to those people?
Like you are a caregiver. It doesn't, how you perceive you're doing at the role like doesn't play into the fact that you are or are not a caregiver. Like you
Yeah.
are providing care to someone else.
Yeah.
And we're all struggling in this role. Everyone is. I mean, this is not something that is just like easy and we don't have strong emotions about the situation and have days where we're just trying to survive and get to the end of the day. And that sometimes feels like that's a Herculean task.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you are a caregiver, and don't let that comparison take that away from you.
Yeah. It makes me think about like, okay, so I'm a mom, I'm a wife, you know, you're an engineer, right? Is that
Yeah,
the title
that's
you'd use?
correct.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good. You know, like we have these other titles and you're not like, well, I'm not a very good engineer, so I'm not an engineer, right? Like
right. Yeah.
in no other places do we say like, oh, I have to be a certain amount of it or rank of it to be able to get this name. We are, you know,
right.
it's something that we have come into. And so I wonder like if we can think of it that way instead, like, yep, I'm a caregiver. Just like, yep, I'm a wife, you know? And I don't say like, oh, I was a bad wife today, so therefore I don't get to be a wife, right? Like,
yeah,
you know, or that person is a mom to 7 kids, so she's like more of a mom than I am because I have 1 kid. You know what I mean? Like in those other titles and roles, we don't do those kinds of things. And so, you know, I wonder if we can start to think of it in that way instead, you know?
Yeah.
You've said a lot about like social media, and I think, the comparison. And so I know that we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth mentioning about the comparison to people our age or people living the life that maybe we thought we were going to have.
Right. Yeah.
And that's another reason I've been sort of hesitant to even talk about this trip, is because I know it's really hard. And I've been there too, especially in summer. Like you're a caregiver and you can't go anywhere and you can't do anything. And you're in the hospital and you're whatever. And here's people living their best lives. Right. And so I think that that's another comparison, especially when we see people who are like in our same age group or people who like maybe we grew up with or were on the same trajectory with at one point.
Yeah.
And now our paths have diverged, right? And we're like, oh, is that what my life would have looked like?
Yeah.
And so that kind of comparison about like, oh, they have this or they are doing this and I would have maybe, but I'm not. And, you know, so it's just, that comparison too. Or somebody was saying the other day, like that their kid will never, or has only known their spouse as a sick person, you know? And I think the same is true for Maya, you know, like she's basically has only known Sean as this. But that's all she knows though.
Yeah.
It's not like she knows of a different way of having a dad, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that we think like, oh, well, a dad should be, or a mom should be, and and that our kid didn't have that situation. But like, this is what she knows.
Right.
You know? And so it's like to her, this is what being a dad is, you know? And so I think that those comparisons can then really like bog us down and make us think that we're missing out. And I'm not trying to bright side, but I just think, you know, like sometimes it's what we have is what we have. And it's not that other thing is necessarily better, but we make ourselves think that it might be, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I can certainly relate to that sense of seeing the trajectory or seeing the lives of others.
Yeah.
And thinking that could have been us, or that, you know, we thought that was going to be us. I mean, I feel that a lot with seeing people who are, you know, raising kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know what the answer is to, or if there is, to like not feel the pain associated with that comparison.
Yeah.
I think that maybe there's things you can do to minimize your exposure to it. I think like if there are people, you know, that you can mute people on social media.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
If seeing their lives is just making things feel too raw for you.
Yep.
That's if you have to put up some walls to kind of shelter yourself from that, like that's okay. Like, you know, if you're cooking and you keep grabbing in the pot and the handle's burning you, like you're gonna get like a hot pad.
Right.
Like you're going to do something to prevent that pain.
Yeah.
And so like, that's okay to do that. And certainly you can't avoid it 100%. Like,
right.
You can't not be going through the grocery store and see a cart with a kid in it,
Right.
shopping with with their parent.
Yep.
And not sometimes feel the pain of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one.
It is. It is. And I think part of that is like self-preservation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so sometimes you might be like, oh, but it's my friend and they're going through this thing and I'm happy for them that they're going,
Mm-hmm.
but some of it is just like flat out self-preservation that we just need to mute them, or we just need to like excuse ourselves from that gathering or that party or that whatever. Like, that's just what we need to do, to support ourselves and that's okay.
Yeah, right.
That's totally okay.
Mm-hmm.
The other realm that I was thinking about this with is about our people. So like, and we've talked about this before about sort of the highs and lows of being like in a disease community.
Yeah.
But when you know of people who have the same disease or are struggling with some of the same things, it's hard to not do a comparison of, well, they're way sicker than him. And is that where we're going to be? Or they're less sick. So I'm kind of jealous, like when Sean first had his bone marrow transplant, there were support groups for caregivers on the floor. And, there it's a very much like a numbered, like, what day are you on? Because like day 0 is day of transplant.
Okay.
And so in these support groups, they would say like, oh, my person's on day 6 and we're going home tomorrow. And we'd be like, what? Like, we're on day 15 and we're not even close to going home. Right. So then it kind of makes you panic. Or they're like, oh, my person is like not doing well. And they're looking like they're getting this, and then that can cause panic of like, is that where we're going? Right. And so sometimes that comparison thing within for your person can feel really stressful of that. Like, so I just saw a Facebook memory pop up from 7 years ago. 7 years ago at this time, Sean was in the hospital having his bladder removed. And at that time there were 5 or 6 other adults with FA who were all going through hard things. And someone else in the community said like, prayers needed for all of these FA adults, and listed them all. And Sean is the only one who is still alive from that list.
Oh,
yeah. And so there's that kind of comparison.
Yeah.
Right. Of like, holy crap. Right. Like what? So, I mean, hallelujah. Like, wow. Right. But also like, whoa. Like how did we get to keep going and they didn't? And like, there's almost like a survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And like right. So I think that we can also have the comparison with our people, and like, it's helpful to know other people who are going through it. But at the same time, we can't help but think about like people who are doing better and worse, and what might that mean for our future. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about that with Sarah and her ME. Like, she has went through a very intense, difficult, like, years of being in bed because of that.
Yeah.
And she was able to now be in a place where, I mean, it's night and day from where that was. I mean,
Absolutely.
She is, like, every other evening she's walking around the block with me with Mosey. And that's something that feels like even a year ago would have felt impossible.
Yeah.
And like, I know other people with ME who that is not a possibility in their lives.
Yeah.
I know that like people who are caregivers for someone with ME who that is absolutely not their situation right now.
Yeah.
And it sometimes makes me feel hesitant to talk about that this is where we've ended up.
Yeah.
Because like, one, you don't want to give false hope.
Right.
You feel like somehow you don't want to like feel like showing off isn't quite the right word, but like, look at what we've been able to do. When you know that other people are not in that place, and maybe, with the way this disease is, may never be in that place. Like, there are some people who, that's just not what's going to happen. And so you have that comparison in the back of your mind. And then it, like I said, it kind of can filter what you feel comfortable talking about and how much you feel like you want to share. And I don't know if there's a question that I'm trying to answer with that, but it's just a thing that I notice and a thing that I feel.
Absolutely. And I think the trick there is that, you know, then you're having this great moment. Like, that's huge news.
Yeah.
Like, even in the years that I've known you, that is huge news to know that she can take a walk around the block, you know, multiple times a week. That's a big deal. And so, but then it's also like for you to feel like you can't celebrate that.
Right.
You know? And I get that. I mean, there's somebody who had just found the podcast and was like in the early episodes and their person had ME. And I said something like, well, spoiler alert, if you go ahead like 50 episodes, like Justin's wife's doing really well. Right. So yeah, it's tricky because again, it's like we want to be sensitive to, you don't want to give false hope, but also sometimes that could feel really hopeful. Like if I was like, yeah, I know somebody, I always feel weird when someone reaches out and says, oh, I know someone with, or my person has this disease. And then I'm like, well, yeah, I just knew someone with that and they died. You know what? It's like that kind of thing. But how do we also, like, when we have to celebrate our good moments. And so for you to be so sensitive that you're like not talking about the things that are going well is kind of sad too, you know?
Yeah. Right. It's like we are anticipating how someone might compare their lives to our lives and letting that influence, our ability to feel like we can celebrate.
Yeah.
And, you know, there may be people who, that's hard to see, hard to hear, but there also are people who they know the hardship that this life is. They have seen that. They know that you've gone through that as well. And like, also people want to be happy for you.
Right.
Too. I think that's also true.
Yeah. I know. I've been thinking so many of these things about this trip and like, do I post about it? Do I not post about it? And I thought, I really think that people will be happy. Like when we have gone on trips in the past, people are like, I'm so happy to see you getting to do this, you know? And I think in some ways, like you and I are like uber sensitive people, like in the best possible way, I hope, because we notice and we see when people are being insensitive. Right. And so, whereas others might just be like, I'm just going to do the thing. Like, I think we might be like tiptoeing, you know, of like, oh, I don't want to, which is good, but also like, I don't want that to keep either of us or others from celebrating, you know, what just really needs to be celebrated, you know?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the boardroom because I'm wondering like, what's at the core here? And probably a lot of people, a lot of members, board members.
Right.
But I'm just wondering, like, what are the emotions that are showing up in all of these moments that are keeping us from claiming the title, asking for help, sharing our, you know what I mean? Or like, I don't know, like all of this comparison stuff. What board members do you feel like show up?
I mean, I think it can be a lot. There could be like, you might feel envious.
Yeah.
You know,
for sure.
Or jealous.
Yeah.
Or angry that, you know, seeing other people's on a trajectory that you wanted to be on.
Yeah.
Or if you're comparing and things feel like they're going well compared to other people, you may feel guilty about that and guilt maybe there. Yeah. I think there's a range that can be.
There is a range. Yeah.
Could be felt.
I think bitter maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we think about like the different trajectory, I almost wonder, like, I don't know if this is the right word, but like tenuous almost. Like it sort of seems like this, like, do I get to be a caregiver?
Yeah, right.
I get to share my, you know, like not deserving.
Yeah.
So I just think, I mean, I think like you said, it's a range. And so I think it's just always good for us to like go back to the boardroom. And for those who are new listening, we're sort of essentially talking about like this sort of what emotions have different voices in our heads. Right. And so if you're feeling a moment of like, well, I can't go to that support group because I'm not really a caregiver, or, oh man, I'm having a good day, but I shouldn't tell anybody about it. Like when you're having these different moments to sort of stop and be like, okay, who's showing up? Like, which emotions,
why am I feeling this way?
Yeah. Which emotions are sort of driving the ship right now? And is there a different voice that could stand up and like say, maybe it's compassion that could stand up and say, hey, I see you and I see that you feel like you're not worthy because your situation isn't as dire as this other person's. and you are worthy of support.
Right.
So maybe you can get a different voice on your board to stand up and sort of take the hand of the one that's having that moment and say like, hey, it's okay. You deserve this too,
Yeah, I think, this is potentially a great opportunity to practice self-compassion.
Yeah.
And I think we did an episode on that.
I think
on
so.
compassion. I think so. So maybe you could go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
But because I think that's something that we often have to practice that doesn't come natural.
Yeah, for sure.
And not that, it's great that we have these feelings we don't want because of comparison, because it gives us an opportunity to practice self-compassion. Like that's not the
right.
But it's gonna come up.
Yeah.
And so use that as an opportunity to like, whatever you do, like I will often like put my hands on my chest, apply pressure. And it's like I've said, it feels like giving myself a hug kind of.
Yeah.
And just acknowledging that whatever it is, whatever the comparison is causing you pain, acknowledging that and letting there be space for that to breathe kind of.
Yeah.
I think can be helpful.
Yeah. I wonder about some sort of like mantra or something about like that basically like all of us are different.
Yeah.
Like we're all our own people. And how can we just sort of claim or honor that like each of us is our own individual person on our own path, living our own life, and whatever it is, it's its own special story. And there's no one way that this life thing is supposed to go.
Right.
And that this is our story. Right. And that whatever it is ours.
Yeah.
And so instead of feeling like it's less than or it's not enough or it's missing out, instead to be like, this is my story.
Yeah.
And there are hard parts to it and there are beautiful parts to it, but it's mine and it's only mine. And it's nobody else has a story just like it.
Right.
And it's not like, oh, everybody else is doing this thing and I'm the only one who isn't. Right.
Right.
Or whatever. It's like, no, everybody's different.
Right.
So claiming some sort of something about that, about our individuality and about the beauty and the hardship of our own story and how we each matter in our own way,
Yeah. Yeah. Something else I was thinking about as I was kind of, thinking about this topic in preparation for recording this is, how does gratitude fit into this? Because I think that as a practice, like noticing the things in life that you are grateful for. And sometimes in a caregiving situation, that's really hard to see anything.
Yep.
And I don't want this is not you should feel so grateful for this situation. Like this is not that.
Yep.
But I think that these comparisons can highlight things that we feel are gaps in what we're doing or things we're missing out on or ways we're failing.
Right.
All of that. And I wonder how spending time also thinking about however small something a grateful thing might be, like maybe your person was able to, there were days where if Sarah was able to sit up in bed and have dinner with me next to her, like that was a beautiful moment.
Yeah. Yep.
What do you think about that? How gratitude fits in?
I think that's powerful. And I think that we can get that. You're right, that it's sort of like the antidote to this comparison sometimes. Cause I can be like, oh man, we this or that, or we used to that. But like you said, if you, instead of being like, whoa, she could sit up in bed today and have dinner. If instead you were like, well, she used to be able to like ride a bike, right? Like then it doesn't work. You miss out on the beauty.
Right.
Right. And so yeah, I think it's looking for those little things. We've talked about like little glimmers, and sometimes that's something beautiful, like, oh, it's a butterfly or whatever. But I think we can also look for them in our lives of like, hey, like even this weekend with all of these not random, but these like family members in the ER, I had to have a moment of like, it's not Sean.
Right.
Like, look at us. We have not been in the ER for a long time. And to be grateful for that. Or to be grateful for wherever we are. To be grateful that resources exist that can support us when we're having a hard time. Even little things like when I wake up, I try to like think of things I'm grateful for. And often in that moment, it's like, I really love this pillow. Like even those little things. But I think that brings us into, instead of like, I feel like comparison is often like a wanting, like, oh, I wish I had, I don't have, like, it feels like a lacking.
Right.
And I think gratitude is the opposite of that, where it helps us feel like, oh, what do I have? What am I? What is happening? Yeah. So I think that's a powerful way to be.
I think that this is maybe a nice segue into, we talk to supporters.
Yeah.
And I think with this talk of gratitude, if you are a supporter, don't approach it as talking to the person like, you should be grateful for this, because I feel like they can be very much like bright siding.
Sure.
There's a fine line there.
Yep.
And I don't know exactly how to tell you as a supporter how to walk that line, but I think I want you to be aware of that.
Yep.
That maybe it's not your job to be finding and pointing out the things that they should be grateful for.
Yep. Exactly.
That's kind of their journey.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure. So what do we feel like for supporters? How can supporters help with this comparison thing?
Yeah. I think, in one of the ways we talked about, if situations are difficult for you because you're comparing your life with the life that you thought you had, or people who have things that you will never have, as a supporter, to know that certain situations may be hard, may be painful, and to give grace to the caregiver. And if they can't show up, if they need to, slip out, to just be understanding in that regard, I think is one way. I think also to be careful with what you're sharing about and how you're sharing about other people that you may know who are sick or are caregivers. Yeah. Like I think you said something earlier in this episode, like, yeah, I knew so-and-so who had this and they died.
Right.
Like that's maybe not helpful. Or, so-and-so has this and they're doing so well. I don't know.
Right. Exactly.
Just to be sensitive and know that what you're saying may be causing these gears to be turning in their heads, like, oh, that's this and that's not me, and how that fits together.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And I think even, if you're like your neighbors and you're like, oh, well, we just went on this fabulous vacation or whatever, like just to be thinking about like, what are the things that might, and just to kind of read the room, right? Because sometimes it's not like I want people to not tell me their hard things or not tell me their good things, and we've had lots of people have said that to Sean, like, oh, I can't tell you about the fact that I just broke my foot because you've had 6 cancers. And he's like, what? No, like, I want to be with you in your hard things. So I think it's all about the way it's framed, right? I mean, there's the one thing to be like, oh, I'm having the worst day because my nose is running, and Sean, you just wouldn't understand, like, everything, you know what I mean? There's that, but then there's also like, oh, this is just I don't know, there's just like, but it's not like we don't want to hear when people are having hard stuff. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's all about how you frame it and how you phrase it, and the sensitivity around it. And thinking about kind of like when we talked about anticipatory grief, like think ahead about like if you're going to have a graduation party or a baby shower or whatever, like who are the people who this might be really hard for, to attend your thing, and do you give them an out, or do you give them a whatever, or do you know what I mean? Like, just to be sensitive.
Yeah, I think sensitivity is kind of what it comes down to there.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Somebody is our t-shirt line that we're going to make, right? Was it the last time we said we were going to make a shirt that said like, we're not going to say at least.
Right. Yeah.
So we're just going to, the next one can say sensitivity is key.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like this is one of those topics that like for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be like, oh, we should have said, oh, we talked about, there's a lot to unpack here. So I just want to say, you said it really beautifully earlier, but just about, hey, like caregivers, like, it's not like you have to earn this title. Like you were thrust into this role. It's a role that you have. And whether it's a good day or a hard day, or you're doing your best or you're, like struggling, like you still get to claim the title and you still get to access the support that is out there, regardless of how severe your situation might be today or how you're feeling about it, or if the person lives in your house or if it's a physical or mental, all of those things. So that being said, we are offering support groups. And so our next one will be about this topic. Yeah. And we'll get to talk together about comparison, which will be great. So keep an eye out for those dates. And also know that if anybody ever wants one-on-one support, they can reach out to me as well for that. And just know that however you're doing it, you're doing it the very best you can. And your story is yours alone. Right. So yeah, it's an important story, and we're glad that you're here and you're doing it. Yeah. So yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, my friend. Good talking to you. Yeah, this has been a good conversation. Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll see you soon. Okay. Okay, bye. Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.